Hello and welcome to Guide London. My name's Nick Salmond. I'm a member of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides here in London, and we're all represented by the Guide London website. That's over 600 professional blue badge London tourist guides. Now, at the moment, we're not allowed to guide because most of the buildings and the places we usually guide in are firmly closed. So what we've been doing is our regular series of broadcasts on a Monday, a Wednesday and a Friday at this time to try and bring you a little bit of London into your home. This is our 13th week, so we've already got a large number of programs in the bag. And if you've missed any of our programs, then the place to find them is either on YouTube or on Facebook. Just go and search for Guide London and you can find all our programs archived there. Things on the history of London, on the culture, on some of the great buildings you can visit and some of the people who've lived in London. Now, today we're going to talk about one of the great buildings of London, one of the great exhibition places, and that is the National Gallery. It's the home of the British art collection. And in its walls, there are more than 2,300 paintings which tell the story of Western European art from the middle of the 13th century right up to the end of the 19th. If you go to the National Gallery, you can see works of art by such famous people as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Titian, Botticelli, Vincent van Gogh. They're all represented, all their works are represented in the National Gallery. It is free to enter, but your visit to the National Gallery is always enhanced if you go with a London Blue Badge tourist guide. And today we're joined by London Blue Badge tourist guide, Ingrid Wallenborg, who is going to tell us about the National Gallery. She's going to tell us about a sample of pictures you can find in the gallery to give you a little taste of what you could see if you were to visit the gallery. Now, we are broadcasting live, so we welcome any questions. All you have to do is put your questions in the comments page, either on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll try and answer them at the end of the program. And also, we'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you've been to the National Gallery, tell us about your visit and tell us your favorite painting in the National Gallery. We'd love to know that as well. So without more ado, I'm going to hand over to Ingrid, who's going to tell us all about the National Gallery. Ingrid.
So hello, and as you can appreciate, it's quite a challenge to talk about. I've picked 7 paintings in just 25 minutes. So just a few words about myself. I've been a guide for a long time, a few decades, and I have done some additional art history studies. And in fact, I have just this afternoon sent off my application to go back to university in the autumn to do an MA. So I'm very interested. So the choice, well, I've tried to show the range and diversity of the gallery. Basically, I've picked 1 painting per century, 2 in one occasion. And I've picked artists from the Netherlands, from Germany, Italy and France and Britain. But obviously there could be many different ways of choosing 7 pictures, but each painting is significant in one way or another. That's suffice to say. So and also please bear in mind that obviously every painting one could speak for half an hour about, and I have like 2-3 minutes per painting. So please forgive me if they're not going to be comprehensive explanations. There'll be a few things to say about each painting. So I think we should start. And my first painting is very famous. This is by Jan van Eyck. It was painted in 1434 and often called the Arnolfini double portrait or Arnolfini portrait. And Jan van Eyck was recognized in his lifetime as one of the best artists in Northern Europe. In fact, what's also very interesting about him is that he was very well paid. So he ended up working in Bruges at the court of Philip the Good. And we know that Philip the Good doubled his salary twice within the first few years. And on one occasion when he hadn't been paid on time, Philip the Good, had a real go at his treasurer, saying, what am I going to do if he leaves? There is nobody else who can replace him. And what they really appreciated about Van Eyck, which I hope you can see on this double portrait, is his extraordinary ability to produce what looks like a real visual realism. Now, the painting was commissioned by the gentleman on the left in the picture, who we now think is Giovanni Niccolao di Arnolfini. There's been a lot of debate about their identity, and indeed hers still remains a bit not quite sure. It's possibly his second unidentified wife. Be that as it may, it was commissioned probably to commemorate an engagement, a marriage, not quite sure, but there seems to be some kind of formal gesturing going on his behalf. The visual realism has been achieved, and I hope you can see what I mean by that. You're really looking into like a three-dimensional space, and the reality is very much conveyed by his way of handling oil paint, the way that every colored surface it's graded depending on how the light falls through the windows. So I mean, the red bed in the background, you can see the shadows falling. The back wall is differently shaded because of how the light falls. The floorboards are in the shade underneath Arnolfini, etc. You can also not fail to notice the extraordinary outfits. Now, Arnolfini, as you might have worked out, would have had to be very wealthy to then engage Jan van Eyck, this very well-paid artist. And indeed, Arnolfini was an Italian merchant in Bruges who made a lot of money through dealing in textiles and also in money lending. He actually lent money to the Duke of Burgundy. So, he was rolling in it. And I'm sure he told his wife, let's put on this green outfit. And in fact, both the green outfit she's wearing and his outfit are fur-lined. So they're very exclusive. But of course, it's a bit odd because if you look through the window, you might not see it, but there's a cherry tree blossoming. So it's definitely at least spring. So they're probably very hot in their clothes. But obviously, it's a painting also displaying his social status as this successful merchant. Now, funnily enough, this painting was owned the following century by the great aunt of our next sitter. And this great aunt was called Margaret of Austria. And here is a picture of her great niece. And I put this painting in because of its connection with Britain. And it has to be said that the artist Hans Holbein was one of the most skilled portraitists of his generation. Now, Holbein was born in Germany. He was very well traveled. He went to the northern part of Italy. He went to France. But he ends up going to England in search of commissions. And cut long story short, by the time this painting was painted in 1538, he was already employed by the very famous Henry VIII. And Henry VIII in 1538 was looking for a fourth wife. I'm sure many of you will know some of the details here. And what you have to do then is to find a suitable bride. You asked artists to paint potential candidates. And that is the reason for this painting. So in 1538, Hans Holbein was sent to Brussels, and he was accompanied by the English ambassador to the Holy Roman Empire and Flanders, Sir Philip Hoby. I mention that because Hoby wrote a lot of letters about this, so that's why we know a lot about this commission. And Christina of Denmark was apparently a very popular candidate. People were really quite excited by the prospect that Henry might marry her. She's already a widow here, and she's very young. So I don't know if you can see on the picture, but she's only 16. She's a teenager. And by the time this was painted, she had already been married off as a young girl to the Duke of Milan when she was 11. And then he died 2 years later. So she's a widow by the age of 13. But here she's 16. Apparently, she's very attractive, wise, and it's really wonderful the way that Holbein is able to convey some of her character. And of course, beautiful painting of her luxurious widow's weeds, this sort of fur-lined silk robe she's wearing. When Henry VIII saw the painting, apparently he fell in love with it. But luckily, perhaps for Christina, he did not marry her. The deal did not come through. However, he kept the painting throughout his life. So even though he picked a different bride, he was obviously very fond of this painting. Now moving on to a more happy love match, staying in the 16th century, a painting that I felt I had to pick because at the moment the National Gallery is waiting to open an exhibition by Titian, or about Titian, which has been postponed because of the virus. And so we hope that we don't have a date yet. However, even if there's no exhibition, this painting is always on view at the National Gallery. And as so many ambitious artists in the 16th century, Titian is illustrating a story from classical mythology. And if you are new to history of art, Titian was based in Venice, and he would become, again, one of the most successful artists of his generation. And this painting was a very specific commission. The Duke of Ferrara, Alfonso d'Este, wanted the most famous painters around to decorate a very particular room in his ducal palace called the Camerino d'Alabastro, the alabaster chamber. And initially, the scheme also involved paintings by Raphael and Michelangelo. However, those commissions never materialized. But clearly Titian wanted to really pull out all the stops. You know, he wanted to show that he wasn't the best. And the story he picked is about Bacchus and Ariadne. It's told in many sources, and it's important to know that Titian has not, he's not illustrating the story. He's modifying it for his ends. In fact, the commission, the theme basically is all, hedonism, lovemaking, drinking, music. And the background to this scene is that the lady on the left is Ariadne. And in the myth, she rescued Theseus from the Minotaur. And then Theseus, typical bloke, abandons her. And she's wandering on the beach of the island of Naxos in Greece. And then Theseus is sailing away. And you probably hard to see this, but just left of Ariadne is a tiny ship sailing away, just immediately left of Ariadne. But she didn't have to be alone for long, because up turns Bacchus, the god of love, with his entourage. And Bacchus, as you see, is in the middle with his wonderful pink cape, and immediately he sees Ariadne, he falls in love. It's love at first sight, and he's throwing himself off his cheetah-pulled chariot. And he probably will land very uncomfortably, but he's careless because he's met the woman of his dreams. And in fact, you can almost feel there's like a cord between his eyes and Ariadne's eyes. They're sort of held, suspended in air. And behind Bacchus, you've got the groupies and followers of Bacchus. The ladies are nymphs playing on cymbals, and the men are satyrs, which are kind of wild nature creatures. But of course, Titian has also made sure that he has included something up to date from classical antiquity. And if you look at the right-hand side, there's a figure, sort of darker brown in profile. It looks a little bit frozen, who is encircled by snakes. And this is no doubt inspired by the Laocoon. The Laocoon was a sculpture from late Greece antiquity, which they had discovered recently in Rome. And it caused a sensation. It shows you a man who's being strangled by serpents. It's very dramatic. And by this figure, Titian is showing his awareness of the legacy of antiquity. So very happy story, beautifully painted. You notice the strong colors. The blue sky, of course, would have cost a fortune. It's using an awful lot of lapis lazuli to make the blue color ultramarine. But then again, the client here was not poor, the Duke Alfonso d'Este. And on the theme of capturing a moment like this, the next work of art is even more dramatic in that way. And again, one of those paintings you cannot walk past without stopping. You will be many familiar with this artist. This is a painting, we're into the next century, 1601, by Caravaggio, whose real name was Michelangelo Merisi. The nickname Caravaggio is because he came from Caravaggio in Lombardy in Italy. People know this artist not least because his fiery temper and the fact that he had a few spells in prison. But we will concentrate on this very dramatic painting. So he arrived in Rome. He was about 20 years old. And initially he was displaying his talent through amazing still life and also sort of very sensual, unusually composed street scenes kind of things. And then he's spotted by wealthy patrons, including, there were 3 brothers, the Mattei brothers, and one of them commissioned 3 paintings in 2 years. This is one of them. And if you're not going to choose a subject from mythology, you might, of course, equally well, to show off your talent, choose a theme from the Bible. So this is an event told in the Gospel of Luke in the New Testament, chapter 24. And it's the 3rd day after the resurrection of Christ, the 3rd day after the crucifixion of Christ. And the 2 apostles are walking on the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and they're joined by a 3rd man, who's the man in the middle of this painting, and they don't recognize him. And then they decide to have a meal together in the evening, and it's only when the stranger breaks bread and blesses the bread and the wine that they realize that it is in fact the resurrected Christ. And of course, as you can imagine, this is an extraordinary realization, and they go, crikey. And the way that Caravaggio has chosen to depict their astonishment is very dramatic. First of all, the action is right up close to the picture surface. You're right there. It's a cropped scene, so there's nothing to distract you. You're just looking at this table and the 4 people involved. And then, of course, the 2 apostles on either side, the one on the right, the way he is stretching his arm out, and the apostle on the left, whose elbow, which is torn, is sticking out. They're almost coming out into your space. Caravaggio is using foreshortening, this way of very dramatically creating perspective into space. And of course, it's the dramatic lighting. To quote a tutor of mine, it's Steven Spielberg in action here. And in a way, if you begin to analyze the lighting, it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't matter. It spotlights on to underscore the meaning. And you notice a shadow behind Christ, which is very dramatic. Now, not everybody liked this. One critique, of course, was that the apostles didn't look like apostles because they look like workmen, like laborers. I mean, they have dirt under their fingernails. This is not the way that one was used to seeing apostles, etc. But there were many others who felt that this made art seem, or the Bible seem more immediate. And I'm going to show you another painting just quickly by an artist who went to Rome when Caravaggio was there and obviously thought this is the way to do things. So this shows you Hendrik ter Bruggen. He was what was called an Utrecht Caravaggisti. They were painters in Utrecht who specifically were inspired by Caravaggio. And I think you can see here what I mean about the cropped format, the figures right up into the picture surface, and the dramatic lighting. But now we've spoken about Italy and the Netherlands and the German artist, and now we're going to talk about a British artist. And the reason we haven't talked about one before is because there were not very many who made it into important collectors' ownership until we get to the 18th century. And this is also because of a bit of fun. And it has been that the artist William Hogarth, his reputation keeps growing. So he's mostly famous as being a satirist, although he did other genres of painting too. But here is a very good example of what he's most famous for. And that's what were called modern moral subjects. So they were serialized paintings, often, highlighting hypocrisy, corruption, the flaws of society that he saw all around him. And then he would do a series of paintings, and then they were made into engravings, and then people could buy a print. So that was much cheaper. And this one is called Marriage à la Mode, and it's 6 paintings. I'm just going to talk a bit about this first scene. And already in the title, you get a clue here, because marriage à la mode means basically marriage which is fashionable. In fact, he took this title from a play by Dryden. And so already you understand this is about a marriage of convenience, and it doesn't go very well. And so this first scene, you've got the aristocrat sitting on the right-hand side, Lord Squanderfield. So the clue is in the name. And Lord Squanderfield is showing with his left hand his family tree, that he is descended from, some famous person, probably even William the Conqueror. However, he has no more money. He spent all his money. He's a spendthrift. And above him, through the window, you can see an unfinished building he can no longer pay for. So what he's going to do, he's going to arrange a marriage. So he's going to have his son, who's sitting furthest to the left, married to the daughter of a merchant. And the merchant is the man in the red coat in the middle. And the merchant is basically going to offer the Lord money, and will buy himself higher status that way. In between the merchant and Lord Squanderfield are two figures. There's a man in a grey coat, and he is actually like the notary, and is giving Lord Squanderfield a piece of paper. There's his mortgage on it. So hopefully the pile of coins that the merchant has put on the table as a sort of dowry is going to help him complete his unfinished building projects. The bride and bridegroom to be are sitting over on the left-hand side. And if you knew about fashion of the time, you would quickly see that the son of the aristocrat, he is wearing French fashion. And in particular, if you look at his shoes, he's got red heels. And only one kind of aristocrat would wear red heels, and those would be the members of the nobility who'd been presented at the court of Versailles. So he's been presented at the court of Versailles. And here's Hogarth also having a go at foreign, especially French fashion, in the way that was adopted by the British. And not only has this young man been at Versailles, he's got something else from France too. So on his neck is a black dot, which is Hogarth's way of showing that he's got syphilis. And interestingly, syphilis was called the French pox in England, slightly prejudiced. And so Hogarth is saying that, they not only do you get French fashion corrupting the English society, you get dangerous disease as well. The bride to be sitting next to him in her white dress, she's looking very unhappy, but she's chatting to the lawyer, who his name is Silvertongue. I'm sorry about that if you're a lawyer. And Silvertongue is actually sharpening his quill. Of course, if you sharpen your quill, that has a double meaning. In the erotic sense, I'll leave you to think about what will happen in the following scenes, but it will not end well, put it that way. People loved these, and the problem for Hogarth was that people made illegal pirated copies, which is why Hogarth was spending quite a lot of time to get the Parliament to adopt an act protecting copyright for artists, which did happen very much thanks to Hogarth. I'm going to talk about one more British artist, and somebody who recently, in 2005, this very painting was actually voted Britain's most popular painting. And you might like to know, in fact, that the Arnolfini portrait in the same survey came forth. And this painting is by Turner, William Turner, who you might say is perhaps Britain's most successful painter, both in terms of critique during his lifetime, appreciation, financially. And of course, he was a Londoner. He was a working class boy, and a prodigy, only 15 when he had his first watercolor displayed at the Royal Academy, which is really quite something. When he painted this painting, he was 64. So he is now successful, confident, and can do more or less what he likes. There is a particular event that inspired this scene. So the name of the painting is the Fighting Temeraire. I mean, it's a long line, but let's call it the Fighting Temeraire. The Fighting Temeraire is a big white boat in the left background. And this was a very famous ship that had been at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, when Lord Nelson and the British fleet beat Napoleon's fleet. And it had seen very specific action, so it was quite a famous boat. But of course, after the Battle of Trafalgar, those kinds of boats were no longer used very much. So it was used as a supply ship. And then in 1838, the Admiralty decides that it will sell the boat and to be broken up. And that's what happened. And in the end, the boat would have been towed up by a steam tug along the Thames to be broken up. That's the inspiration. But Turner has taken serious artistic liberty with the scene. And just to say a few obvious things. First of all, the white ship, the Temeraire, would not have looked like that at all. It would have had its masts removed, and it was probably dark brown. Everything valuable would have been removed before it was towed up. But he's turned into this little white, ghost-like, glorious, almost fairy tale-like ship. There were two steam tugs that towed it, but Turner has done away with one, and he's kind of made them contrast each other. So you've got the white, ghost-like Temeraire, and then you've got this dark, powerful steam tug spewing out smoke. If you look very carefully, what's very interesting is that the reflection of the steam tug in the water right below it is actually very much like the Temeraire behind it. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing, of course, is the famous sunset, and you'd be forgiven for thinking the sunset is almost more important than the Temeraire. This is some sunset. I mean, Turner has slabbed on paint. It's thickly encrusted, like impasto. Of course, Turner did that sometimes using the palette knife. So the sun sets in the west, I think, always. But if the Temeraire is towed up the Thames, you're looking east. You're looking towards the estuary. And so it could not have been the sunset like this. But Turner has painted a sunset because one explanation possibly is that by doing so, he makes it more universal. It's not just about the Temeraire. It's about the end of an era. We no longer have such sailing boats anymore. We will now in the future have steamships. It's a new end of one era and the start of another one. And by doing that, in a way, Turner elevates his genre. It's not just a landscape scene. It becomes like a British history painting, which would have been sort of higher status in the Royal Academy. And this painting was seen by Monet, the Impressionist, we know that, and he would have taken note of the use of color, the sketchy, the sketch-like surface of the painting, which leads us on to the last painting, and just 2 more minutes to tell you that we will end with Paris, because of course that was very much the center of the European art world in the late 19th century. And having mentioned the Impressionists, many of you recognize this is a kind of Impressionist painting. It's called Summer's Day, nice thing to talk about on today. And if you're not in London, we have a similar climate here today, very warm. Two ladies in a boat on a boating lake in the Bois de Boulogne in Western Paris. And the artist has painted it almost as if she was sitting in the boat with these ladies. And the Impressionist technique, one characteristic is that you can actually see the brush strokes. Artists are no longer trying to pretend, you have to see the texture of the paint. This particular artist's signature brushstroke is very much like a zigzag. And if you look at the dress, the dark blue dress in the lower left corner, the zigzag brushstrokes are so sketchy, it's almost abstract. And of course, the irony with this technique is that the scene looks so much more real. You really sense the way that the heat makes the air shimmer, the reflection of water. But they've done that, but actually make the paint surface abstract, you could actually see the paint. So this is, of course, the paradox. So who painted this? Berthe Morisot, the only woman who was actually invited to join in the first so-called Impressionist exhibition in 1874. She was invited by Degas because she was talented. And I thought it was important to talk about her because she would have had so many more obstacles than any of the men, and perhaps still does not get enough attention. And I'm just going to end by what she wrote in her diary in 1890. She wrote, "I don't think there has ever been a man who treated a woman as an equal. And that's all I would have asked for. I know I am worth as much as they are." And of course she is. And with that, I hope you now feel inspired to come back and explore many of the other wonderful paintings in the National Gallery.
Ingrid, thank you so much. What a fascinating trip through some of the paintings of the National Gallery. I think it demonstrates how much a guide can add if you go into the gallery and take a guide with you, and they can explain all about these wonderful paintings. We've had quite a few people watching around the world, so just to mention just a few, we've got someone here watching from Brazil. Maria is watching in Buenos Aires. From Buenos Aires, I think. There you are, not frozen.
I've been there.
It is frozen. Bodo is in lockdown Norway.
I think she's a regular viewer.
We have quite a few regulars here. We have someone from
Oh God! Oh, that's wonderful. India.
So quite a few from Italy, of course, where many of the paintings that are exhibited in the National Gallery, of course, come from. There's another one from Italy here as well.
Ciao, Paola.
And another one as well. So there is a question for you from Steve, and he says, if you could hang one work of art from the gallery in your home for a month, which one would you choose and why?
It's a very easy answer. It's the Turner, the Fighting Temeraire, because I'm a romantic, and you know, Turner, the way he paints very much pulls at your emotions, the use of primary colors, these sharply receding recession. I mean, I just love it. I just love it. But I am a romantic. I hope it's romantic.
And Sarah reminds us it was in James Bond.
I know, and I am also a not so closet James Bond fan. Absolutely. And I mean, that's another story. I didn't have time to say what's also interesting. Turner was offered a huge amount of money by an American collector called James Lennox, who offered, we think, £5,000, which would be an astronomical sum for this painting. But Turner would not sell it. You know, he kept it in his studio until he died, and then it came as his bequest. But of course, he was very wealthy. But it's interesting. He thought, no, I'm not selling this one.
Yes, so Nyla says, I love Turner and his smoking engines. So when you take people around the gallery, what is the one painting that really surprises people? What do they get the most reaction from, do you think?
Well, I think I'm not alone. If people who come with not too much prior knowledge, there is one painting which I did not include, which is very good to talk about, which is the Ambassadors, another one by Holbein, which people often have never heard of. But it's a painting, again, painted when Henry VIII was about to marry his, he had married Anne Boleyn. And there's all sorts of hidden stuff. And people find that very interesting. People always like to be surprised, things that they did not know about. But I think, there's you mentioned the strength about the National Gallery. It has art by almost every famous artist in the Western world. I mean, there's so much knowledge now, of course, art historians have uncovered. So I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that surprises people. Not least who's next to Arnolfini, because that's changed in my lifetime. We used to think it was his third wife, and now we think not.
It is certainly an amazing place to go and visit, and it is right in the heart of London. So if you do come to London, I would recommend you go and visit the National Gallery, and of course take a guide with you. If you want to book one of our guides, if you want to know more about any of the guides, including Ingrid, then the best place to go to is the Guide London website, guidelondon.org.uk. You can search for all the guides there. You can look at the different types of tours we do, including, of course, National Gallery tour. National Gallery is not open at the moment because of lockdown. We hope it will reopen in some form in the next couple of months. But you can do a London virtual tour. If you click on London virtual tour, you can see all about the new virtual tours that a lot of our guides are now offering, including the National Gallery, and they can take you virtually inside the gallery and talk about some of the paintings, either for yourself or for your family, or if you're a member of a group, you can book a guide to give you a virtual tour that way. And it's a great way of experiencing some of these wonderful works of art. If you do want to book a virtual tour or any of our tours, then just go to the website, look on London Virtual Tour, and at the bottom of the page, you'll find a form to fill out. You just put in the date you want the tour, a few details, your email, and any special requirements. Just send that off, and that will go to 3 of our London Blue Badge tourist guides, and they will get back to you and let you know exactly what they can offer. So just go to the website guidelondon.org.uk and share this broadcast with your friends and family as well. We'd like as many people as possible to see it and to hear about the wonderful National Gallery. Definitely worth a visit. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for telling us all about the gallery today. We'll be back on Wednesday, and on Wednesday and Friday this week, we're going to look at more virtual tours. So we're going to give you a little taste of some other buildings and places in London and outside of London as well, which our guides can take you on a virtual tour. So join us for that on Wednesday or on Friday at 4 p.m. But from Ingrid and from myself for the moment, goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye.